Hi, this is Neale Johns of Blackfeather, and you're listening to Retrospectives with John Broughton on 3SER KC Radio.
First off, I must mention to you, I believe you're in recovery mode at the moment. You've had a bit of an accident.
Yes, a bit of a faux pas. Had a torn tendon on my shoulder, and my left shoulder, which is I'm left-handed, so that's a bit of a drama actually. Drama for playing guitar and stuff like that. I can't do that just again for a while, but that should be okay in the next month or two.
So what actually happened there?
Oh, I was doing some work in a labouring sense, sort of doing some racking things, and I just tore my tendon. Lifting something was just too heavy.
Wow.
Sort of regretted doing that.
Almost back to normal?
Not really. No, it's. I had the operation in January, but I'm going through physio now, so it's recovering. But I'm hoping it'll be all back to normal. Hopefully better than normal.
Okay. All right, let's backtrack a bit. I'm not sure if you're aware of the Miles Ago website.
Yes, I am, yeah.
Great Australian music resource.
Yep.
In the Blackfeather section, it has 44 names mentioned as one-time members of Blackfeather. I guess enough to field 2 footy teams.
Yeah, look, I'd have to go through those too. You know, I'm not sure. I think... I don't know. There was a Scandinavian gentleman that had a list of all the acts in Australia. I don't know why it was a Scandinavian site, but I actually sent an email to him explaining to him that some of those members were in fact agents and roadies, and so there was a bit of an extension going on in that one. So as far as the Miles Ago one, I'd have to really go through it again.
Yeah,
because there are some names I look at and I go, who's that?
Is the band's history all that complicated to you, or you got a pretty?
No, not at all.
You've got a pretty good handle on it all.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of those changes just went through a period of after the two predominant bands, which there were two predominant bands, and that was the Seasons of Change band with John Robinson and that, and the following one, the Bop and the Blues lineup, which was a predominant keyboard thing. Those two bands for their periods of time were fairly stable. It was only when just after, they got either playing too many venues or whatever, all the things that went, to go back what was going on at that stage, there was a lot of that going on, because I can remember quite a few bands that we were friends with, like Chain and different bands like that. There was this reoccurring thing of moving members around. So I don't know if that was just a thing of the times.
Yeah.
Or a lot of it had to do with me sort of searching too, because I was after different things.
You were quite young when you joined the band. Were you an ambitious kid at that stage? Did you have designs on rock stardom?
I'd already been... I started touring when I was 13. So by the time the Blackfeather opportunity came around, I was singing a jazz rock outfit in Sydney and was spotted by... I think the bass player from the Dave Miller set, and that was when and they were having a little bit of a run-in with Dave Miller, the actual band. So, and he was talking about going solo or whatever, and they sort of thought that I'd be a pretty good sort of opportunity because I was young, I guess young and naive, and I had the right abilities, they thought, to sort of take them that next step without Dave Miller.
Do you remember if the band had a blueprint, or an original blueprint of the sound they had in mind?
A blueprint? Well, I guess it was the Dave Miller set. So I suppose in some respects they'd been touring quite a bit as a band. So the underlying thing there, and the musically controlling aspect of that band, I guess, was John Robinson. So he had some very specific ideas of where he wanted to go. Me being younger, I was developing, so I was going through all sorts of, and as I said, I was in a jazz rock outfit from that to that. So I'd gone from being able to sort of express my chops as much as I liked to being in a band with the loudest guitarist in the country. So I had to develop projection. Because in those days the PAs were about the same wattage as the guitar amps.
Yeah.
So I developed power.
Do you remember the first time you heard yourselves on radio?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't remember it, but I'm quite sure because, I don't know, it was one of those things that just got swallowed up in time, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always an exciting thing, an exciting prospect, because when it did go to radio, it went to radio. I'm just trying to think what the politics were like at the time when that there were some funny things going on politically in radio.
That's right, there were, yeah.
So I'm not sure if it was exciting because of that or because it was me. It was nothing to the other guys, of course, because they'd recorded several things. It was the first time I'd ever been in a recording studio. So that was quite daunting in some ways and frustrating in other ways.
What about the Mountains of Madness album? It's become a fondly remembered album of that era. Do you remember much of the sessions?
Oh yeah. I was at most of them, and that was the underlying. There was an underlying problem with that because of air conditioning was a new thing for me. I ended up getting tonsillitis.
Oh.
So by the time it came for my turn, I did a take of Seasons of Change, which I nailed in one take, and it was a really good take. But something happened and it got lost. So when my turn came again, I had tonsillitis. So I was, quite restricted, and that's become a painful reminder for me forever and more. So every time I hear it, I think of, okay.
Okay, God, it doesn't sound that way to us.
No, I realise that. I mean, that's one of the things you learn, but at the time I was very critical of it, and it was a bit scary.
Yeah. Is that right? There was an agreement broken about that track with regard to releasing your version of the song in direct competition to Fraternities?
Yeah, look, well, Fraternity, as you know, Bon Scott and John were actually on Mountains of Madness. So Bon Scott played recorder on Seasons of Change.
That's right.
And John played piano on the other tracks on the album. And Bon played timbales and a few other things. We were quite connected. There was a connection between the two bands. I mean, as far as what politically went on there, I wasn't really that au fait with it. I wasn't that happy because I thought it was a great song to release. But John had made some sort of deal behind the scenes that it was okay. And I think Fraternity approached a festival to say that they were going to do this, and it was all above board. And they went ahead and did it, of course, and it became a hit in South Australia. I think it went to #1 in South Australia. And as soon as it did, Festival Records realised maybe that wasn't such a good move. But in retrospect, it worked out being a fantastic move for us.
Yeah.
And we played around with that a little bit because I can't remember the exact show, but there was a show where Ian Meldrum was a part of down here. It was one of his early shows, and there was a bit of a mock-up that was planned ahead of schedule with Bon Scott and John Robertson on the set, pretending they were having a bit of a fisticuff thing over. But that was a complete mock-up. And I mean, and the rest was history. It sort of went well. I mean, it didn't do as well as I think it should have, but it did well.
After that success, the band, I guess, kind of split in two. What was the catalyst there?
I guess there was what had sort of taken place was, first of all, the original bass player and drummer had left because the three of those had been together with the Dave Miller set for years, and they had a bit of a run-in about with John. So there was, I guess, John Robinson was a fairly dominant figure because he had a lot to do with a lot of the writing, the material, and he was in the Dave Miller set or even the early Blackfeather things. He was a bit of a prodigy, so when the band was promoted in the early days, it was featuring John Robinson, and then after a period of time, that sort of dissipated, and it was sort of more of a feature on me. So, I think there was a little bit of an ego sort of creeping into the elements there, and I had different ideas of where I wanted to go musically. Probably more commercially orientated, I suppose.
Yeah.
And but then again, with my jazz sort of upbringings, there were other areas that I really wanted to try as well. But yeah, so there was maybe my youth. So I got a bit sticky about it and became a little bit empowered because I realised that I actually did have a little bit of a controlling aspect as well as John. It was probably silly. They're the times that you need a counselling manager that can sort of explain to you the repercussions of doing something silly like that and how it can affect your future, maybe.
Yeah.
But it didn't work for me because, unfortunately, I was the one that instigated the ongoing thing with Bop and the Blues against the other new members of the band, and the rest was history.
So it was pretty much your intention right from the start for Blackfeather Mark II to go down a more basic musical road, I guess, back to your roots, so to speak?
Back to your roots, and I guess, and away from the guitar domination. I suppose that was just a repercussion of what had transpired before.
Yeah.
So it was almost like, look, no, I want to sing. I don't want to be in a battle. I felt like I was in a battle. I felt like it was because of the volume facet, and because it was a really good guitar period, as was the bop and the blues period as well.
Yeah.
So it was like this battle between vocal and guitar, and I suppose you saw acts doing that with Led Zeppelin and things like that, but they did it with a much more panache, so they gave each other areas to do it in, rather than an ongoing battle at the time.
Do you remember how the arrangement for Bop and the Blues came together?
Yeah, look, there was a guy called... Wayne, he was the drummer in a band called Flake. Flake, that song called Wheels of Fire.
Yeah, remember the band.
Okay, well, he was the drummer. I can't remember his surname, that's dreadful. He actually owned at the time, he had an interest in a record store. And he sort of said he heard this song, and he thought it would be a good thing to have a look at. So... we had a look at it. At the time, there was a guitarist out of Flake that was in the band called Billy Taylor, and we had to listen to this song. Thought, oh yeah, it's okay. I don't really think much of it, and without sort of thinking too clearly, decided to sort of redo because it was basically a 12-bar. It was done by Carl Perkins, of course, at the time, and with a band called NRBQ, which was a Canadian band from memory. And we listened to it. We liked the hook in it. The hook was good, and made a big mistake by using that name of the hook as the name of the song, and the rest was sort of history as far as legalities go. And that was Bop and the Blues. We probably should have called it something else, and there wouldn't have been an issue, because that's where it sort of ended in a way. I mean, when you hear songs today, there's a realisation that there's so many songs that you hear now that have got things in them, and you go, my God, how do they do that? How do they get away with that?
Did it sound like that away?
Well, what we did, to get that band going, we did 3 weeks to tighten the band before we went out on the road at a hotel at Bondi on Southhead Road. I can't remember the name of the place. It's a famous place. It's right at the top of Bondi Road. So we did a 3-week stint there. I don't know what we called ourselves, but we did that just to tighten up and get it all going. And the place used to sell out a beer every night. There were that many people there. And one of the things that we did is we did a medley, and in that medley we tested out that hook. And the people just went crazy. So it was an argument. It was something that the other band members felt uncertain about doing. They thought it was a bit of a cop-out, like a musical cop-out or digressing or something like that. I don't know what they were thinking. But the fact that when they saw the reaction it had on the people, that was the end of the argument. It was like, obviously you need to record this song and turn it into a song, which is what happened.
Paul Wild's piano became very much an important part of the band's sound at this time, didn't it?
It did.
Yeah.
And again, that was another thing with me and the Guitar Hero sort of aspect. It even got to the stage where we just eventually had no guitarist at all. We just had, a la Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I saw that there were bands doing it, and I thought, well, why don't we do it?
Yeah.
And just, I won't have any guitarist at all. And then there won't be any problems.
Now, you didn't bring in another pianist to replace him, though, when he left, did you?
No, we didn't. And I don't know if that was I ended up reverting back to guitars again, which sort of came about during the Sunbury period. But those two guitarists were great. It was Tim Piper and Lindsay Wells. Now, Lindsay Wells, I can't, off the top of my head, remember the band he was in. Whereas Tim Piper had been in lots of bands. He was a sort of a session player from Sydney. Both different guitar players and both really exciting sort of players. One sort of a Hendrixy-based player and another one more sort of blues, jazz sort of influenced. And the two of them together just sounded awesome.
Mm.
So I didn't mind that at that stage. I'd outgrown my phobia about guitarists.
Did it become frustrating at any time during the 70s that you couldn't get a settled lineup for the band, that there were lots of changes going on?
Not really. Look, I've got to be honest with you. My biggest frustration was dealing with the record companies at the time and trying to get something happening. Because what happened with Mountains and Madness is there was a major record company in America that was really interested in the follow-up. They really liked what they heard, and they really wanted to have an interest in a follow-up album. And that wasn't really projected enough from the record company, or was there enough insight looked into it? And again, in retrospect, as I said before about the breaking up of the first lineup, anyone that would have had that knowledge alone probably would have prevented that from taking place.
Mm.
You know, it probably would have been more of a roundtable scenario and going, well, look, you know, there's a possibility here of international. So maybe we should look at this a bit more carefully and look at it in a more business aspect. But it didn't happen, and the rest was sort of, you know, well, then again, the Bop and the Blues thing might not have happened if that was the case.
Any standout memories of the Sunbury festivals, or are they a bit of a blur to you now?
Well, they were a blur because we're actually doing another festival in Adelaide. There was a festival that started in Adelaide, and because this was the second Sunbury, we didn't do the first one, and we actually flew between the two, as did quite a few acts actually.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a blur in that respect because it was more or less arriving, performing, leaving, flying, which had become a sort of fairly common thing for us by that stage. It was one of the most common, because we were doing that all the time. So you were in one state 1 minute and another one the next. And in those days, the amount of performances that you did were outrageous. Because I can remember there was a little bit of animosity because we were a Sydney band down in Melbourne, considered taking a lot of work off Melbourne artists.
Yeah.
We were doing 14 spots a week.
Well, that's hard work.
And it was hard work for the roadies. It was, but it was one of those things where you did an hour and off you went.
Yeah.
But when I say 14 in a week, you did have a lot of those incorporated sort of university lunchtime concerts and afternoon gigs on Saturdays and Sundays as well. So that sort of increased it. But there were times that we did, you know, quite a lot of double ups on weeknights, especially Fridays and Saturday nights.
Yeah, there's been a few other bands you've been involved with through the years since then. One which comes to mind quickly is Fingerprint. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Fingerprint was an interesting situation. I was in the last sort of incarnation, I guess, of Blackfeather was a band called Feather, because there was a legality that went down with the use of the name, and I can't even remember. It wasn't even John Robinson. It was someone that had, I don't know what happened, someone registered the name or something, and we couldn't use it in New South Wales.
Uh-huh. So
we had to get rid of the black bit and call it Feather. And that was with a young Stuart Fraser in it. He was 14 at the time. There was a gentleman that used to come in and out called Con Gallen. He got introduced to us by somebody, I can't remember, but he'd actually been on occasions with T-Rex in Europe on some European tours. I don't know whether actually being a guitar tech and sometimes performing on stage as a second guitarist. And there was a falling out with Mark Bolan and the band, I believe. And I got a phone call asking if I'd be interested in going over to England and being a part of this band, which was, you know, naturally enough, I said yes. And that's basically the reason. That's where Fingerprint evolved from. It was sort of T-Rex without Mark Bolan. But no sooner had I got there, Mark Bolan died in a car accident.
That's right, yeah.
So that was an intriguing sort of thing. But that had a lot of potential. But I guess what was going on in that country was sort of scared me a little bit. I saw things that to me were like Australia 10 years ago. I know that sounds bizarre. It's always usually looked upon as when you go overseas somewhere, you're sort of seeing where it all came from and stuff like that. But as far as equipment and guitarists and how they played their technique and what sort of guitars they used and whether they were set up or not was something that didn't exist over there, and it frightened me quite a bit. It was a bit strange. And the people were desperate.
Yeah.
I found. There was a lot of desperation going on, and at the time, people like Clapton who had a habit, and Peter Townsend was an alcoholic, and I met all these people like on regular basis, but which was sort of inspiring and uninspiring all at the same time.
Now, to more recent times, you're in the middle of a recording project at the moment.
Yeah, with I've been coming down here the last, well, not the last, but apart from last Christmas, the few Christmases before that, coming down and doing some Blackfeather gigs, just from here and there and everywhere. And so I decided to move down here. And Brendan Mason, who was with Madder Lake, was a part of that project. It was actually called Blackfeather, but it was in fact a band that I was in before I left Melbourne quite some years ago, called Claude Rains, which was the bass player Kerry McKenna, and Brendan Mason, which both from Madder Lake, and Trevor Young from Coloured Balls.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a band called Claude Rains. I believe ahead of their time, whereas we used to get some criticism of being, they used to say that we were a 70s boogie band, and I couldn't quite find the boogie part anywhere in there. It was a mystery to me. I used to think, oh, what, a 70s boogie band? It was anything but. It was a full-on, like, kick-ass. It was just nothing like a boogie band anyway.
Yeah.
And so that's what that ended up being. And because of that, Brendan and myself started finding that we wrote together really well. He would give me some ideas that he have, and I'd take them away and come back with something that he just didn't even conceive. And that became a really strong bond between the two of us as far as writers go.
Yeah.
And we've kept that bond going, and yeah, we have been recording. It's been a long process because we just seem to have too many songs, and it becomes a stigma in a way. And at the same time, I've been constantly writing, and it's and these songs come up and you go, oh, that's a great song, we have to use that. So you really have this stigma where, God, you've got to get it out quick. You've got to get all this stuff off your chest. The songs that you really feel strongly about, and you know that they've got some essence. And a lot of these songs, by the way, I tested throughout the country in different audiences and that's the way I gauge material. I gauge it by when audiences have never heard it before, and you get a reaction from them, especially in choruses that they start. That was the Bop and the Blues sort of concept.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really believed in that, but unfortunately record companies haven't. So for years I've had this stigma of, fighting with A&R, people saying, look, and they go, oh, look, you're singing great, but there's just no hits there. And I feel like saying, look, these songs have been tried on the audiences in every state, and they're goers. You just need to sort of stick your neck out a bit. But anyway.
So what's the plan of attack now? To put it out independently, or? Yes,
well, that'd be the obvious choice, unless someone does want to pick up on it.
Yeah.
I mean, the main criteria or thrust of the whole thing at the start for me was to get a catalogue happening. So at least I've got a catalogue of my material that's fairly recently recorded. Things that I would have recorded over that period of time. It was almost like an anthology, sort of like, it's just some songs that I have kept for 20-odd years or even 30-odd years because I feel strongly about them as a song. I think they're great songs, and they didn't suit the Blackfeather lineups, but I felt that they were just too good just to let go. And to me, it was a way of perhaps somewhere down the track showing how I was developing musically, and things that might have come out had the circumstances been different.
And have you found Brendan as a collaborator?
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. As I said, we get on really well as people and as musicians, and we both have similar understanding. We both have our points of views that point things in a more level direction. But it's been great, and we have in the past done a duo performances around town, and we are intending on doing that again this year, well as a trio. We're going to work as a trio with Kerry as well, just the three of us, just to bring in another voice as well, and work as a band.
Fantastic.
So we want to do all those things. We found with the duo it was a great source of testing out the songs on audiences because you didn't have that element of power with a band and that. So the song was really being sold by voice and guitar, and it was really the strength of the song, I guess, that would get you through.
So I guess the ultimate plan for 2006 would be to get this thing out there and get yourself back on the road again.
Absolutely. Oh, that's a definite. As soon as my injury has recovered properly enough, we'll be back out working again. We're in the process of correlating. We've done a DVD for the band, but we're doing a promotional DVD for ourselves and the trio, and that'll all coincide with everything else. And we're intending on having because with Kerry, he also has a different writing style again. So we're going to collaborate on different things and do as many different things as we possibly can. So there's a diverse amount of things available at the gigs and on the marketplace.
Fantastic. And just one more to look back one more time, Neale. How would you like to see Blackfeather remembered?
As an innovative band, particularly the Seasons of Change lineup, with a lot of possibilities, and with the bop and the blues thing, it was more of a tongue-in-cheek thing to show that there is a more fun side as well as a serious. I think the previous band was a more serious concert-orientated band.
Yeah.
Whereas the bop and the blues lineup was more of a fun party sort of atmosphere.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think to be remembered as having something to offer.
Any regrets at all? Anything you'd go back and change and do?
Absolutely. I'd change management, particularly, and I would have been more dominant in the business aspects, because it sort of it was very detrimental. And I probably would have moved down to Melbourne and stayed here a lot longer, because there is a closer knit circle of musicians down here than there are in Sydney.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and they all appear to help each other out and things like that, which was lacking sadly in Sydney. And I wouldn't have gone away so much, because everyone thought I wasn't singing. I'd been singing constantly, like right up until maybe 4 years ago, like just performing like on a weekly basis. But I was always in obscure places like Byron Bay, and I was having a sea change, but singing at the same time.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you back in the Melbourne music scene again.
And it's great to be here.
Best of luck with the project. We look forward to that, and best of luck with the remainder of your recovery. We hope.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good on you, Neale. Thanks a lot for your time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Much appreciated. Bye.